Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I want to remind you that Charlie Fabian is available for your comments and suggestions. I want to thank you for sending so many of them in. They're very useful to us, so please continue to do so. charlie.info438@gmail.com is his address. And likewise a reminder that the book Understanding Capitalism is a kind of companion volume to what we do on this program. And if you're interested in that way and getting deeper into it, that would be useful for you to have to consult. We're having a special program today. My guest, who is enough to make it special, Chris Hedges, someone who's been on this program many times before and whose work you all know anyway. He's going to be with us for the full half hour. I want to take advantage of all that he knows over a lifetime of work, particularly about the Middle East and its relationships to all that is going on here in the United States. So, please welcome with me, Chris Hedges. Thank you, first of all, Chris, for being on the show. Thanks for having me, Rick. All right, let me give you the brief information bio. It doesn't do him justice, but we'll read it anyway. Chris is a Pulitzer Prize-winning former foreign correspondent for the New York Times. He spent 2 decades covering conflicts in Latin America, Africa, the Balkans, and the Middle East, where he spent 7 years and served as the paper's Middle East bureau chief. He is the author of 16 books, including several New York Times bestsellers. His latest book is entitled A Genocide Foretold, Reporting on Survival and Resistance in Occupied Palestine. He has taught at Columbia University, New York University, Princeton University, and the University of Toronto. He has also taught for over a decade in the college degree program offered by Rutgers University in the New Jersey prison system. You can find much of his work at chrishedges.substack.com. So let me begin, Chris, by just opening it up. Tell us how you react, first of all, to the decision of Israel to preemptively bomb Iran in the background of everything that has happened there and all that you have studied and written about the Middle East in your years of work. Well, this has long been the goal of Bibi Netanyahu, going all the way back to the second Bush administration. Israel has lobbied the United States to sign on to a war with Iran. Most of us who have covered, I've worked in Iran, of course, and Israel, most of us who have covered those countries believe that in the long term, Israel cannot sustain a conflict with Iran unless the United States intervenes. In the short term, of course, they have achieved quite a bit. They have apparently air dominance over Tehran. That strike, the initial strike, was apparently a surprise to the Iranians, and they took the hits. I mean, it's very hard to tell because once you're engaged in a conflict, both sides attempt to cover up what's happening. That's why reporters are being pushed out of Haifa, where oil refineries have apparently been hit by Iranian missiles. So what is the goal? I think the goal, there are 3 goals that Israel has. First, they would like to degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities. It's not clear that they have achieved much in terms of that. Natanz, they may have been able to wipe out some of the buildings, but in Fardal, which is the main production point, that's deep underground. They would need 2,000-pound bunker busters provided by the United States in order to really disrupt that facility. But that's number one. Number two, They would like regime change. I think it's a pipe dream or a fantasy, but that's why you have seen so many senior Iranian officials assassinated. And I think the third point is that they hope that this deflects from the final chapter of the genocide in Gaza, with attention sort of being focused on the Iran-Israel conflict. They have a freer hand, I think they think, in order to push the Palestinians out of Gaza. That we don't know where they're going to go. Speculation is that they would be pushed, despite Egyptian objections, into the northern Sinai. In terms of the conflict itself, Iran is estimated, Iran's air force is, we've always known, has been very weak. It did have Russian and Chinese supplied surface-to-air missiles. In terms of air defense, it does appear that in that initial strike on Friday, the Iranians suffered tremendous losses. Either that or their air defense system wasn't as good as we thought it was. They have about 2,000 missiles. They're firing usually in bursts of about 200. They can sustain that for a few days. Israel's Iron Dome, Israel's interceptions, or the missiles that will intercept the incoming missiles, they will deplete those stocks pretty quickly, which will allow Iran to increasingly inflict damage on Israel. But the question is, how many missiles do they have left? How effective were Iranian strikes against missile production and missile launch sites? We just don't know any of that. But in the long term, this is not good for Israel. Iran is a massive country. It's the size of Western Europe. Is the 17th largest country in the world. That is a population of 90 million. That's 10 times the population of Israel. Israel is a very small country and very concentrated. All of that said is, we don't know where it's going. I think in the next few days, we will continue to see these airstrikes by Israel. We will continue to see retaliatory strikes by Iran. If the United States is drawn into this conflict, which is what Israel is hoping for, then you're really going to ignite a terrible regional war. The Strait of Hormuz can be shut down, especially if Israel destroys Iran's production facilities, oil facilities. They have more incentive, because they're not sending oil out, to shut it down. That's a choke point where about 21% of the world's oil supply passes through this very narrow, it's only about 30 kilometers wide. There's so many ways that this can go wrong, and I think I would finally add that this will be interpreted by Shiites throughout the region as a war against Shiism. Iraq is predominantly Shia. 2 million Shias live in Saudi Arabia, and most of them in the oil-rich region of Saudi Arabia. Huge Shiite populations in Turkey, Bahrain. It's a very, very dangerous moment. It's a very dangerous gamble on the part of Israel. And there are lots of ways this could go really, really wrong. We should also be clear that Iran has a close alliance with Russia and with China. At what point would Russia be drawn into the conflict? We can't preclude that. Why would Israel, already engaged in a process in Gaza that is damaging Israel's reputation, its chances for survival into the indefinite future as it becomes, the pariah nation it already is, why would they start a second war? And I'm not even asking about the impact on Israeli society and economy that what they're doing in Gaza already has cost them. This is going to distort their economic and social life. But why would they do this? I mean, I think hubris. You have seen Israel decapitate Hezbollah. You have seen Israel seize huge sections of Syria with the overthrow of the Bashar al-Assad regime. They're virtually up to the gates of Damascus. You have seen this live-streamed genocide, and the message to Israel, which, by the way, is, of course, blocked not just humanitarian aid, but food since March 2nd. 500,000 of those some 2 million Palestinians in Gaza are now on the brink of starvation, and nobody intervenes. So I think they feel they can do whatever they want. Well, they're not wrong about that. And the United States will continue to funnel weapons to them, continue to back them, whatever, and preemptive war, which is what Israel essentially done as a war crime, just as we did in Iraq. Iran did not pose a threat to Israel, was not hostile in the sense of engaging in hostilities towards active hostilities that you could call a war towards Israel. But I think it's hubris. I think they may have overstepped, of course. They may have gone too far. But I think that the message they have gotten, especially out of Washington, from both administrations, as well as Europe, Germany, the Germans have been defending their strikes on Iran. The UK, they've all backed this genocide for 20 months, and it doesn't matter how horrific the images are. There's no impediment to the weapons supplies. Israel ran out of weapon stocks. It depleted its stocks a long time ago. I think about 70% of its munitions now come from the United States. So, but we show, no indication. We just vetoed that ceasefire resolution in the UN. We show no indication of backing down. So Israel feels that it can do whatever it wants in the region. I think in the short term, that's probably correct. In the long term, I'm not so sure. What about the longer term? Tell me, your judgment is what I'm interested in. Your judgment as to why, given the 90 million versus whatever the population number you want to use, 7 to 10 million Israeli, non-Arab Israelis, given the longer term, given that they're surrounded by Muslim and Arab, I understand Persians and Arabs are not the same, all of that, but why would the longer term absurdity of this tiny country, whatever the United States or Europe does, the ability of the United States and Europe in Ukraine has been demonstrated not to do what it is they thought they could do. Why is that lesson not learned here? I think in the short term, Israel feels pretty confident. I think Israel's plan in the long term is clearly to draw the United States into a conflict. I think there's a fallacy that somehow they can break Iran solely through aerial assaults. At what point, if the United States is drawn into a conflict, does that become a ground war? Given the size of Iran, you probably need at least 1 million troops. I don't think in the end an invasion or occupation of Iran would go any better than it did in Afghanistan or Iraq. But I think Israel is banking. The thing about Israel is that it essentially is sustaining permanent war, to steal a line from Trotsky. But it can't do it alone. It needs, in the last kind of barrage of missiles. This was after the strike in April on the Iranian embassy in Damascus. They needed the U.S. to intercept those missiles coming in. And they are going to very quickly deplete their stocks, and they're going to need new stocks from the United States. But it takes a while to produce this stuff. So I think in the long term, Israel is counting on the fact that it can draw the United States in. It has a strong, of course, the Israel lobby owns Congress, and it's wedded with the neoconservatives who orchestrated the disasters in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, and everywhere else. And I think they're banking on that they can suck Trump into this conflict. I think over the long term, if they don't, they potentially, I learned a long time ago not to predict the future, but potentially, if Iran can continue, and we just don't know what its missile stocks are, but if it continue to fire off salvos, 100, 200 missiles at a time, ballistic missiles, and if Israel's air defense system, which is inevitable, becomes increasingly degraded, then, and again, as we spoke, Israel's a small country, then I think there could be real damage inflicted on Israel. But I think the goal is clearly now to entice the United States into a war. We've come to the end of the first half of the show, so give us a moment to break and we'll be right back. Before we jump into the second half of today's show, I wanted to thank you for your very generous response to our fundraising efforts this year, and in particular in the last couple of months. And in part responding to that, we are extending the availability of our limited edition linen-covered hardcover version of Understanding Capitalism, the book I wrote and that we have been making available now for quite a while. If you are interested, I will be signing copies of that hardcover, and they will be available to you as they have been over the last few weeks. Just simply send an email to us at info@democracyatwork.info and put in the subject line Limited Edition. We will send you all the information you need to order and receive your signed copy of Understanding Capitalism in its hardback. And thank you again for your kind attention to the fundraising dimension of what we do. Mr. Zelensky, in my judgment, and please of course correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Zelensky had no hope either for a long time without drawing the United States in much further than the United States seemed willing to go. And that didn't work, and that doesn't worry the Israelis as far as you can tell. Well, the Ukrainians don't have a lobby as powerful, anywhere near as powerful as the Israel lobby. Israel, for instance, again with these neoconservatives, made a huge push for the United States to invade Iraq under the Bush administration, the second Bush administration. Although Iraq obviously had nothing to do with 9/11, it wasn't a threat. I was in the Middle East at the time, wasn't a threat to its neighbors or much less to us, in the same way that Iran is not threatening its neighbors or threatening us. So that's the difference, that the power of the Israel lobby and the lust. I mean, let's be clear that these neoconservatives have just orchestrated debacle after debacle, fiasco after fiasco. And they're not all these generals and the CIA and these celebrity pundits that cheerlead war and these neoconservatives and the Zionists. They're not about to take credit for the debacles. They're going to blame it. And who do they blame it on in Iran? In fact, what they did by destroying Iraq as a unified country, which is what they did, 20 years of occupation, is they destroyed the balance in the Middle East between a powerful Iraq and a powerful Iran. And they made Iran ascendant. In fact, the government in Baghdad is Shiite-dominated and closely allied with Iran, completely upending the very purpose that we went into Iran. I mean, remember when they went in, they spread this fantasy that they would implant democracy in Baghdad and it would emanate outwards across the Middle East, especially to Tehran. And the goal was always to bring down Tehran. Well, that's especially true now because they've demonized Iran for all of their own failures. And they have this kind of fantasy that somehow if they can take the Iranian regime out, they can... Let's be clear, these people are historically, linguistically, culturally illiterate. They don't know anything about the Middle East. And that's the game they're playing. But these people live in a non-reality-based belief system just to believe that they were going to go into Iraq and be greeted as liberators, and the oil revenues would pay for the reconstruction, and you would build Western-style democracy in Iraq. All of this was a utopian dream, if we want to quote Thomas More in the way he used it, literally as no place. It doesn't exist on the reality-based map. And these are the same people that are pushing a war with Iran, which I think ultimately over the long term will be catastrophic, not only for the United States if they get involved, but for Israel. I know this is asking you to predict the future, and I could not agree with you more that's a fool's activity. I'm going to ask anyway. What's your gut about the likelihood that a Trump administration will be drawn in, both because of the pro-Israel lobby here and the pressure from this evolution, etc.? What's your sense? What's just your feeling? I know nobody can predict. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I'm not speaking to people within the Trump administration to get a sense of where they're at. Clearly, if Iran carried out a strike, we have all sorts of military bases in Oman and Doha and everywhere else in place, and Saudi Arabia. If strikes were carried out against U.S. military personnel, U.S. bases, or U.S. ships in the Strait of Hormuz, then I think that would be a gift to Israel. And Trump would be hard-pressed, probably not, to halt this stampede towards active involvement in the war. There's obviously tacit involvement in terms of intelligence, probably in terms of supplies, surface air missiles and this kind of stuff. So that would, and my suspicion is that the Iranians won't do that. Let's be clear, Iran doesn't want a war. Iran has long avoided Israel's baiting and provocation into a conflict. Even the last time it sent missiles, they announced them in advance. It was kind of all choreographed. I don't think there were any Israelis killed. Maybe there was one Israeli killed or wounded, but the numbers were not like now. So that would probably, if an event like that happened, then I think Trump would probably be willing. But I sense, Trump keeps talking about negotiations. I don't think the Iranians are, especially since we just assassinated some of their negotiators, or Israel did. It does seem that he's reticent. That's my reading of it. But Trump is so mercurial and so impulsive, and what he says one day denies the next. He's a very hard person to read. He probably can't read himself. So I guess the red line is if U.S. installations are hit, my guess is that the Iranians are not going to do it because they got enough on their hands with the Israelis. All right, let me turn now to Gaza. Tell me what your sense is of an end game there, if there is one, and how these events will shape any change, if any, in what Israel seems to want to do there. Well, the war with Iran, or the conflict with Iran, will clearly accelerate the genocide in Gaza. I think this is the last chapter of the genocide. Israel has no intention of lifting the blockade, which includes food. People are starving. They are rushing, and then they've said very cynically, set up this, Gaza Aid Foundation in the south. Nobody argues that there's anywhere enough food. I think there's only 4 feeding hubs. I'm not sure even they're operable. Every day they're firing on desperate crowds, killing people, a few dozen people a day. And what they're doing is using those food hubs, which are all in the south, along the 9-mile border between Gaza and Egypt, around Rafah, or this border city, Rafah, to entice people down to the south. And I wouldn't be surprised if at a certain point the Israelis facilitate a breach in the fence, because there are parts of that border that are just fence. And despite deep Egyptian objections, allow Palestinians to essentially stampede into the northern Sinai. It may end some other way, I don't know. But I think we're now seeing the last few weeks of the genocide. And I think Israel is thrilled that the focus is on Iran and the Iran-Israel conflict because it gives them a free hand. And they just got internet, so they can't even get images out of Gaza. They have no intention of lifting the food blockade. Starvation works. There's just nothing left. There's no clean water. 90% of Gazans are sleeping amid rubble or in the open air or in improvised tents. The disease is rampant. Respiratory diseases, scabies, of course, all the diseases, hepatitis, that comes with drinking unclean water. The hospitals are gone. The fuel supplies are running out. So the emergency vehicles, I think they have 53 ambulances, less than half are working because they can't get fuel. So Israel will accelerate this process while the world isn't focused on it, and seeks to essentially empty Gaza and resettle it with Jewish colonists. There have already been conferences in Israel with attempting to recruit Israelis to be colonists, especially northern Gaza. And that's my fear. I mean, the question is where the Palestinians are going to go. I'm not sure even Israel probably could answer that question right now. But that day, that this is the final drive to push them out. And then we will see Israel turn on the West Bank. 40,000 Palestinians have already been driven from their homes since October 7th, since the October 7th attacks. Israel has seized huge areas of land, and they've now announced a whole blockade of the West Bank itself. Any opposition inside Israel that you know of that has existed all the way through, how is it reacting to all of this? Well, there's heavy opposition to Netanyahu, but from opinion polls, there's not much opposition to the genocide. And I think, the fantasy is somehow replacing Netanyahu with someone else. It may, and getting rid of these rabid right-wing fanatics like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and others, it may give it a more palatable face to the Israeli government. But I don't think that will in any way disrupt Israeli policy towards the Palestinians, which has very, very broad support. And how do you account for that? Well, the trauma of October 7th, and then also Israel. Elon Poppy wrote a very good article about this a few years ago. Israeli Jews are just indoctrinated with this kind of demonization of Arabs or Palestinians from, grade school on, and this mantra of, the whole world wants to kill us if we don't kill them first. But that's been all transferred in particular towards Arabs and towards Palestinians. And then by severing very few, used to be when I lived in Israel, large numbers of Palestinians, several 100,000, both out of Gaza and the West Bank, worked in Israel. So at least there was some kind of human contact. That now that's gone. There's after October 7th, I forget the numbers, about 110,000 or something Palestinians worked in Israel. All the work permits were cut. So there's no contact at all with Palestinians. And I think there is this belief that we can, solve this problem, which has been bedeviling Israel for 7 decades by just erasing the Palestinians, by getting rid of them. That is, and I think October 7th exacerbated those feelings, which were always there. But the trauma of October 7th, I think, plays a large part of it. Do you ever hear that the model for all of this is the United States and what it did to its indigenous population? Yeah, but I don't know that it's the classic subtle or colonial model, so it wouldn't be limited to the United States. It's what the British did in India. It's what the British did in Kenya. It's what the French did in Algeria. Settler colonial projects are very similar in terms of the patterns that they create. So it is. Of course, we are a settler colonial project as well. So yeah, I think the difference is between our settler colonial project and the Zionist settler colonial project is that we killed the 90% of the indigenous. And when that's the lesson, when you're in Tasmania, where they killed all the Tasmanians, or southern Argentina and the Pampas, or, when you actually obliterate them in a genocide, then they can't offer resistance. The Palestinians were never obliterated the way we annihilated Native Americans, especially after the attack on the 200 soldiers under Custer's command, where the U.S. government adopted a policy to either kill them, including starving them, by the way, or denying them sources of food, or putting them in POW camps, which later became named reservations. And so the numbers of Palestinians, both in the diaspora and with still on historic Palestine, 2.3 million in Gaza, it creates a different kind of scenario for Israel. If they can push them out, if they can dispossess them the way the Turks did the Armenians, I think that's the point. So the Armenian genocide, you had huge numbers of Armenians who were killed, but then large numbers of Armenians that were pushed over the deserts in Syria and out of the country. So it's a little different, but I think it's tied to it is the classic behavior of any settler colonial state. Chris, we've run out of time. I want to thank you enormously for sharing your history, your study, and your acute observations on that situation. I also want to commend you for the courage you've shown, particularly over the last few years, in being an important voice in the United States for some sane understanding of what's going on, and then willingness to take the sides when you see them needing to be taken. My hat's off to you and my appreciation, and thank you again for sharing your insights with us. Thank you, Rick. To my audience, I want to close as I always do, that I look forward to speaking with you again next week.